Hi, my name is Roger Burnett, and welcome to the first ever Wild Wednesday webinar monthly education series as presented by the West Washtenaw Business Association. I'm a proud member of the association and I'm participating on the programs committee in 2021. So on behalf of President Corey Dunham and programs committee chair Jason Tracy, it's my distinct pleasure to present to you this topic on this day, January 27th. But I wanted to give you a little bit of an insight into the Wild Wednesday webinar series as we anticipate rolling it out for the remainder of the year. So we're going to do these on the next to last or last Wednesday of every month. And as you can see here in the slide, we anticipate that we will have the February event on the 24th, as well as the March event on the 24th. And what we're anticipating doing will be to announce the future topic on the last day of the preceding month. So that would suggest that on the 31st of January, you can anticipate hearing what you can expect in the February 24th session. And we also are encouraging members of the association who want to know specific topics and are looking for education on a specific set of information to please reach out to us on the programs committee so that we can do our level best to go out and try to find someone that would be considered a subject matter expert on the topic that you would be interested in hearing more about. And we will do our very best to try to bring you topical, relevant, and timely information as you request it. And in the interim, we will be delving into topics of interest that we believe that all small business people would be willing and able to benefit from if they were exposed to the information. So this particular month, I'm going to lead things off with a presentation called Marketing with Purpose. There's a really interesting book out there called The Speed of Trust. It was written by Dr. Stephen M.R. Covey, who is the son of Dr. Stephen Covey, who many of you will remember from the Franklin Templeton planner days. But in this book, The Speed of Trust, there's a very specific equation that Dr. Covey outlines in order to be able to give business owners like you and I the opportunity to have the best possible results. You can see here in the slide that that equation is simply strategy multiplied by execution raised to the level of trust is what will give us as business owners the best possible results. We're going to delve into this equation during the course of the conversation, but let's just think about these elements for just a moment before we dive into the presentation itself, because I want you to have a very good understanding of what it is we're talking about when we say these three elements, when used in combination, give you the best possibility of having the strongest results possible. So obviously, having a strategy is important. If you don't know what it is that you're trying to accomplish and you don't have a strategy articulated in order to be able to accomplish that, you're really just kind of waking up every day trying to figure out whatever it is that you should be doing in that moment. And then if you have an execution plan to take that strategy and make it actually turn into something tangible, those two things in conjunction with one another oftentimes are measured as the way that people may be having success. So if you have a poor strategy, but you're executing on it to the best of your ability, that will give you a certain amount of success. If you have a good strategy and you're executing on it well, that will give you an even higher level of success. But there's this key element that is exponentially more important than either strategy or execution, because without it, you really don't have the opportunity to achieve those outsized results that all of us are looking for in return for the investments that we are going to make, and that's trust. And when you talk about trust, we're going to dive into that today to get a better understanding of when I say trust, that you can understand exactly what elements I'm talking about that comprise trust so that you can have a clear understanding of that as well. Because if you think about it, if you have strong strategy and you're executing on it well, and you have a team of people that have a lot of trust with one another, that's going to allow you to outperform organizations who also may have a similarly strong strategy, who also may be executing well, but maybe don't have that same level of trust that your organization does. So by knowing that that is the key element within the success formula, if you will, we can examine the ways that, given what's going on in the world today, we can ourselves position our companies for the best possible opportunity for success, because it's vitally important in this moment as we look at 2021 and beyond to know what are the key elements necessary in order for us to really be able to make things happen. So let's start to dive into that. But before we get into it, I want to make sure that I set the stage for you so that you understand what it is that we're going to cover in the course of these roughly 30 minutes, which also will leave a little bit of time for Q&A should that necessity raise itself. So if you're in the audience and there's something of interest to you that you want me to circle back to at the end of the presentation, please leave a comment in the chat section, and I will be sure to cover those at the end of the presentation so that you get your answers to the questions that might be pressing in your own mind. So let's think about this. Really what we want to do is we want to consider what I'm saying when I mean the sea of sameness and how that pertains to each of our own businesses and the marketplaces in which we compete. Because what we know is that all of us are faced with challenges in the form of competitors. And there can only really be one low-cost provider in the marketplace. So if that's not you, what are you doing to justify the difference between the cost that someone can buy what you sell from the low-cost provider versus what it is that you want to charge? And what is the delta and how do you justify it? Then we'll cover this concept of differentiation via added value and why being able to communicate what it is that sets you apart from your competition is going to be incredibly important in being able to communicate what it is that's going to allow you the opportunity to stand out in that sea of sameness. Then we'll cover the concepts of alignment and attunement so that you can understand what those concepts are within the formula for success that we discussed in the previous slide. And then I'll use the back half of the presentation to make the case for purpose and why I think that that is a very significant competitive differentiator. And then lastly, we'll look at my book that I co-authored with Stan Phelps, who is just a dynamite author who's written a number of books, four of which have become New York Times bestsellers. And we'll give you some ideas around how you may be able to get started yourself on your purpose statement if differentiating on purpose is something that you would be interested in doing. Okay, so what's going on right now? Well, we're still dealing with COVID. Here we are more than a year since our first notification that this virus was around and that the possibility of it spreading was significant. And whether or not you believed in the virus at that moment or not, what we recognize now is the sum total of what's occurred for us, both societally and economically, when it comes to dealing with COVID. There's really no denying the fact that we've had to deal with this for a significant period of time. And while we wait for the widespread transmission of the vaccine and the herd immunity that we're all looking forward to, there are a number of challenges that we're all faced with when it comes to trying to manage our day-to-day business right now within what is considered the pre-COVID economy. And we'll want to be ready for what happens once we've reached that critical mass of vaccinations so that when it's time to really get going, you're going to be ready to make that happen. And if you're like me, you're doing a lot of research right now and turning to places like Deloitte and other places where you're typically getting your information in order to be educated on what it's going to be like when we get to that critical mass moment so that we can all position our businesses in that time to be the most ready to take advantage of whatever opportunity is going to present itself when we finally reach that stage. So regardless of whether you think that's really, really soon, or if you think that it's going to be in the back half of 2021, or maybe you even are thinking that this isn't going to be until 2022 for your own organization, you're really going to want to buckle down and think about what you have available to you in time and what it is that you're going to try to accomplish between now and whenever those limiters and governors are finally taken off of the marketplace in which you compete. In addition to that, we've got all of these other things that are going on societally that are creating additional stresses and pressures for us that we have to factor in, not only for what's going on within our own business, but also within the businesses of our prospects and our clients, because much of the same things that we're dealing with societally are not unique just to us. It's pretty much a universal problem that most people are facing. And so as a result, There are all of these outside forces that are affecting our ability to make real connections with people in this moment, because for the first time in really ever, most of us are dealing with the types of pressures that are not traditional. They're very unique, and in many instances, they're changing almost on a daily or weekly basis. So we're constantly having to reevaluate what's going on surrounding us in order to be able to try to make heads or tails of what that's going to mean for us as we try to take our strategy to market. In addition to that, we also have what's going on with respect to the way that what's happened over the course of the last 12 months is starting to make some changes in the ways that the people that we typically do business with are thinking. And there's a number of statistics out there, but I wanted to just touch on a couple things that I think are going to be foundational for this discussion so that you can be considering these things as I'm talking about the things that I'm talking about going forward. So one of the things that we're seeing that is really, really impactful is the cost that's associated with person-to-person interactions is pretty extraordinary. If you think about your human resources costs, in many instances, that is the most, that's the biggest expense that most organizations have to take care of on a day in and day out basis. And when all of us were forced into a work from home situation, for those of you who were considered non-essential workers, immediately business owners started considering whether or not there was an opportunity to start to shift some of the investment away from those really high expense positional titles within an organization, especially those ones that were tasked with face-to-face selling. And that largely had to do with the fact that no one was in their office to be able to be received for a sales call. So those resources are being moved away from your personnel cost, and they're moving towards things like an inside sales team that are less expensive, and then e-commerce and customer service and web support, which is all based online, which is less expensive, which is less time consuming once it's set up. And obviously you don't have to worry about the internet calling in sick or having a problem with COVID. So as you're watching that shift happen, it's having a little bit of an effect on the ways that those customers that you've traditionally been dealing with are taking themselves to market because they don't have the same personnel that they had pre-COVID. And then secondarily, we're seeing a complete shift in the nature of trust. Trust today had traditionally been invested in things like the government and our political leaders and non-government organizations like Salvation Army and things like that, that we're looking towards to try to be able to work in order to make the economy a better place. But what we're starting to see now is a shift more towards a peer-based level trust model, where really when I'm trying to make a decision about what I want to do with something, I'm not really looking towards those traditional sources of information that we may have relied upon in the past. Now I'm spending a lot more time talking to the people who I really trust and trying to get a sense of what all of their opinions are with respect to the topic at hand, so that I can use the information that I've gathered from trustworthy sources that I can rely upon to help inform my decision. It's a lot of challenges that are going on in this environment right now. And so by the time I usually get to this slide, when I'm doing this in person, what most people I'll see are sort of these looks of worry on their faces, because people are really wondering, like, how can I stand out in this if this is what's going on? If all of us are really not very trustworthy anymore, and we really rely on those around us for our information in order to make an informed decision, how am I, as the business owner, going to recalibrate what it is that I do so that when there are a multitude of choices available to someone who's trying to make a decision, I'm going to be in the best possible position to be seen as the trustworthy choice in that moment for that person at that time, especially when they're not going out to the internet to find information. They're seeking that from people that they know. It's a bit of a challenge, and it represents a pretty significant move in what was already something that was happening, but now we're seeing it being accelerated in a way that many of us as business owners maybe weren't completely ready for, because of the prosperity that we had been enjoying up until COVID, which really was making it so that we wanted to make sure that we were getting our orders out the door and really not necessarily spending as much time in consideration of how we may be seen as that standout company in the sea of sameness. So you're really needing to be considering what it is about your business and you as the leader of that organization that would be the reason why people would want to share what it is you do with others in that moment when they're being contacted by their peers for information about how to solve a problem that they have. So really what we're talking about is trust. And when we get to trust, if you remember, we talked about the equation at the beginning of this presentation where we said strategy multiplied by execution raised to the level of trust is really the best possible way to get the results that you're looking for. And when you use those elements in combination with one another, you're really giving yourself the best opportunity to outpace the competition. Because if you think about it this way, really, regardless of whether you were a small organization that was really seeking information and sources of differentiation for your business, or if you were a large organization that was really a marketplace leader and really executing well on what it is that you do for money, or if you were a mid-sized organization who was poised for some really breakout growth, everyone is kind of in the same boat at this moment. And so as a result, everyone really, regardless of the size of the organization, and in many instances, regardless of the organizational title, people are looking for places that they can find people and things that they can trust. And when I say trust, the two elements of that really comprise trust for most people are the elements of competence. So when I say competence, what I'm saying is, can you be seen as one of the people who do what you do extraordinarily well? Or are you just in that business because there's a lot of opportunity and there's not enough people to cover that demand? So it gives you the opportunity to be successful, even if you aren't necessarily the most competent at what it is that you do, you just happen to be available. And then secondly, when you get beyond competence, the other piece of this that needs to be in conjunction with your ability to get the job done is your ability to be able to be seen as someone that I, as the person with the problem, would feel good about working with in order to help solve my problem. So even if you're capable of getting the job done, if you aren't going to get the job done in a way that I'm going to feel good about, then the likelihood of me choosing you is really going to be a function of whether or not I can find equally competent people who maybe might be perceived as having somewhat higher character. So as you consider these trust elements, and remember, this is really the catalyst for outperforming the marketplace, you need to be able to demonstrate these two characteristics in combination with one another to give yourself the best possible opportunity to win that game at that moment in time with that potential prospect who's out seeking reasons to try to do business with you as opposed to your competition. And once you get to that place, really what you're giving yourself the opportunity to do is to expose yourself to a potential new prospect. And the thing about most prospects is they're out searching for a solution for a very specific problem. And what we're saying is, unlike in the past, when they were going to places that we've historically been used to them going to in order to find solutions for those problems, what we're trying to impress upon you is that now more so than ever, people are turning to one another in order to get help in understanding how to best solve the problem that they have. So if you can be seen in that moment as the trustworthy choice in order to be referred, that gives you the opportunity to actually solve that person's problem. But it's vitally important that you recognize that solving a problem for a customer at a moment in time is really the only first step in the process. It really only gets you a transaction. And getting a transaction is nice, but what we really want to do, if you think about our jobs as business owners, it's not only to just get transactions, but it's to then keep that person doing business with you for the intermediate and even the long term, if at all possible. So in your strategic thinking, you've got to have not only a strategy to get those clients, but you also have to have not only a strategy to keep them, But if you're really doing this well, we'll reference this saying by Maya Angelou, which is really, if you want to wow those customers, if you want to keep them around in a way that's going to have them talking about you to other people proactively when they hear that their peers have the same kinds of problems that they had encountered when they first found you, you're really giving yourself the best opportunity for that long-term sustained success that many of us were seeking even before COVID. But now, more importantly, as we are in this element of reset, we're really trying to make sure that everyone recognizes that this is a three-pronged strategy. You need to be able to get your customers in the door. You need to be able to create strategies in order to keep them. And then if you're doing it really, really well, you're going to make them feel so special that they're going to go out and do your selling for you. So what we're really saying is, if you're in that moment where you're wowing people, what you're really doing is you're presenting to them what it is about you that makes them feel special, right? Because if you think about this differentiation strategy, which is really what I'm saying is, here's why you should do business with us and never leave us ever again, because we're so good at what we do that there's really no reason for you to do that. And if you're successful in accomplishing that objective, it really serves two purposes for you. One, it shows to the people who have the need that you've demonstrated that you can provide to them. That's going to serve as an attraction strategy. So in that process, people are going to start coming in your door with more speed than what you're used to historically, because there are people out there in the marketplace who are absolutely singing your praises and making people feel very confident that you would be a really, really worthwhile choice for them in that moment that they've identified having a problem that you might solve. But even maybe more importantly is, there are going to be competitors in the marketplace that as you continue to grow in your success, they're going to start drafting strategies to try to win away customers that you've been able to get. And by creating this differentiation strategy, by using an added value element, what you're really doing is you're serving as a buffer against your competition, because even if they've created something that is slightly disruptive to what you've traditionally done in your go-to-market strategy, customers will have a tendency to somewhat shy away from making that change, even when they see that that competitor might have something that is slightly unique in comparison to what you have, because of the way that you've made them feel and the relationship that you've been able to build with them that is trust-based, that makes them feel like, even though that company that they've seen now that is somewhat different and better perhaps even than you, it doesn't necessarily by itself mean that they're immediately going to jump ship and leave your company for greener pastures, which ensures you a better opportunity to maintain your customer base over time. Which brings me to my good buddy, Stan Phelps. So Stan was my co-author, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, on Red Goldfish Promo Edition, but Stan's a very prolific writer. And as you can see in the graphic on the lower left-hand side of the screen, Stan has written a number of books in the Goldfish series. And Goldfish is a metaphor for organizational change. And the way that Stan presents his concept and theory around organizational change is, instead of trying to make massive, huge organizational changes, Stan's recommendation is to make small changes that could have an outsized impact if implemented and executed on correctly. It goes back to that original discussion point about strategy multiplied by execution, oftentimes was the formula for results and success. But what Stan's saying is, by creating little moments of surprise and delight, you're actually building in ways to build that trust element, which we've already identified as being an accelerator in your performance against your competition. So I would strongly suggest that you read any of the books in the Goldfish canon. They're divided out by organizational responsibility. So if you're in the customer service department, there's a book for you there. If you are in the sales department, there's a book for you there. If you are trying to create a really differentiated user experience, there's a book in there for you as well. It really is an all-encompassing series. My favorite book happened to be Red Goldfish, which was all about the ways that businesses that are aligned on purpose have a tendency to outperform their competitors by an order of magnitude. In the book, he suggests that businesses that are using a purpose-led strategy oftentimes outperform by as much as 120% over their competition in the marketplace. So this is a noteworthy strategy in order for businesses like yours who are trying to consider ways moving forward in the post-COVID economy to really be able to create an opportunity to stand out. So as I said, I would strongly recommend you pick up all of those books, but of course, Red Goldfish really meant the most to me. And it was as a result of the work that I had done with Promo Cares, which I'll talk about here in a second, that we were able to get a promotional marketing edition of the Red Goldfish book written. But before we get into why purpose, from my perspective, really is the strongest strategy that you could potentially use when you're trying to figure out how to be seen as different and better in the marketplace, purpose is not the only strategy that you can use when it comes to differentiation, because at its core, what we're really talking about are these two concepts of alignment and attunement. Now, I want to make sure that I break these down in a way that makes sense to you so that you could digest these in a way that will be able to be actionable for you going forward. So imagine, if you will, you are a company that only wants to sell products made in the USA. So you've aligned yourself in a way that only the products that you have in your catalog, your customers and prospects can feel confident that I know by doing business with that company that I have made sure that the dollars that I am spending are going to stay in our economy. And because that business is then going to reinvest those dollars into their local areas, I'm creating a ripple effect with the dollar that I spend. And that makes me feel really, really good about what it is that I'm trying to do. That means my personal values are in alignment with the company who says we are the Made in USA organization. Or what's happened really, really, really frequently here in the last couple of years is businesses are starting to really show the ways that they are trying to minimize their ecological impact, or show how what they're doing helps to make sustainability efforts better. Huge category. There's a bunch of different ways that you can do that, but there's lots and lots and lots of appetite in the consumer arena for sustainability and ecologically friendly practices that would allow you the opportunity to create some alignment there. But gosh, that's just skimming the iceberg, because those are sort of the easy ones. And you see lots of organizations are using those kinds of strategies, but that's not the only ones. There's other ways to do this. So imagine you were a realtor. Realtors, there's tons of realtors. How does a realtor stand out from his or her competition when people are traditionally trying to figure out who they're going to list and sell their homes with? Well, most of the time that's done by referrals. But if you're starting to create a marketing lane for yourself, for instance, if you like to fly fish, then why not be seen as the realtor who knows all the really great fly fishing spots around the state, so that if I'm a fly fisherman and I'm looking for a retirement property in northern Michigan, maybe I'm going to work with you specifically because I can trust, based on what you've shown me, that you really know where those best spots are going to be. And I can rely on you to do that work for me and show me those places so that I can get on with my retirement. That is a great alignment strategy. Or consider what we've seen with first responders during this entire pandemic. The ways that society has tried to heap praise on the jobs and the work that these first responders have been forced to do, especially in the wake of the socioeconomic problems that we faced over the course of the last year. What better way to try to champion those folks than to be seen as the organization in your vertical market that really caters to first responders? I have a mortgage company as a client of mine who wants desperately to be seen as the mortgage company for first responders. And their success has skyrocketed in the months that they've started to communicate that that's their desire, because there's a lot of appetite out there to support businesses that support first responders. So those are all examples of alignment. But I want to explain why attunement is important, because what we're really saying is, by creating lanes for yourself by showing that you're the made in the USA company, by showing that you're the ecologically friendly company, by being the realtor for fly fishermen or the mortgage company for first responders. What you're really showing is what your brand values are. And when you show what your brand values are, you're really putting a stake in the ground with respect to what your brand stands for. And by virtue of that, you're giving yourself the opportunity to best be able to communicate those values, not just on a mission statement that's on the wall or a vision for what your business is going to be at some point in the future. What you're really doing is you're explaining to the people who work with you and for you what it is that they can expect from working with your brand. Because when you don't do that, one of two things could potentially happen. And I've written about these in these blog posts that you see on the right-hand side of the screen. So if you're at all interested in learning more about these, please by all means reach out to me and I can share that content with you. But what I know is this: most people come to work every single day and they mean to do a really good job, and they actually don't mean to cause any harm to their employer or any of the customers. But if you've not done a good job of communicating what your values are as an organization, when that employee is faced with a decision that requires a judgment call on values, more often than not, they're going to insert their own values in there in place of what would have been the way that you would have wanted it handled as a brand. And I don't expect that most of the time that's going to create a problem for you. But if there's a stress going on, if that person's not having a bad day, or heaven help, something with the pandemic has had a negative effect on them, either physically or emotionally, the likelihood of them being able to stay true to what the brand values are diminishes to the point where it could create some dissonance for you in that you're communicating a strategy by word of your website or your marketing pieces, or even the things that your outside salespeople are saying to prospects and clients, that when someone comes inside of your organization's four walls, if they don't hear that same talk track going on, if they don't see some consistency in the way that you've communicated your brand values and the way that that is executed on the day-to-day of working with your company, that is a really surefire way to lose a customer that you've gotten in the door. So attunement is almost, and in some instances, even more important than alignment, because you may have some unconscious brand values that your organization may have adopted. But if you haven't done that in a way that's really intentional and purposeful, you really allow yourselves to leave the door open for one of those bad situations to occur. And what we know in society today, in woke world that we live in, is that if you do something like that, that occurs, there's a very strong possibility that the person who's on the other side of that is going to go communicate that out in a way that is not going to be advantageous to your brand. Which brings me to Red Goldfish and the case for purpose, okay? So Red Goldfish was about a year in the making, but it really was the result of almost 3 years of research that I did as a result of the organization that I helped co-found called Promo Cares. And the whole premise behind Promo Cares was the idea that we wanted to lift up, elevate, and recognize the businesses within the promotional marketing industry that were using a purpose-led strategy in order to be able to allow people who buy those products that we sell to see the amazing ways that tying a purpose-led strategy to a promotional marketing item could actually elevate your brand in the marketplace as you're competing against those other businesses that we said create that crowded, noisy, and difficult marketplace that almost all of us are faced with when we get up every single day and try to convince people to give us their money as opposed to the door on the right or the door on the left. By the time we were done with the research, we were able to come up with over 300 examples of businesses in the promotional marketing industry that were employing this strategy. And as a result of the analysis, we were able to really uncover some key thought processes and strategies that we were able to document in the back half of the book for people who, if you happen to be convinced by what it is that we've managed to describe to you in the front half of the book, we're going to give you the opportunity to then to go ahead and get started yourself on figuring out the ways on how to accomplish that. There's this notion of the 10,000 hour threshold necessary in order to achieve what's called expertise. Malcolm Gladwell is kind of the mastermind behind this 10,000 hour concept. So we've more than crossed that 10,000 hour threshold when it comes to examining and analyzing the information that we were able to gather, not only for the book, but dating back to the original impetus, which was the promo cares movement that, again, as I said, started in 2018. So this purpose-driven alignment strategy has some really key advantages to it, and we want to make sure that we communicate those to you. So here's something that we really came to recognize, right? So I'm going to make a suggestion that suggests to you that millennial and Gen Z buyers really are interested in what it is about an organization that makes you special. And if you're doing something that makes the world a better place, people in those demographics are really excited to hear about that. And in many instances, they're trying to use their personal beliefs to drive some of their professional buying decisions. So if you can align with those, especially if you have customers that are in that age demographic, you are giving yourself a significant leg up on the competition. But the amazing thing about this that we learned in our research, and what was also highlighted in the 2020 Global Marketing Trends Report by Deloitte Insights, is this is not something that you can do as a campaign. It really has to be a commitment from the organization to this strategy for the long term, because when you do this, you're going to realize three really important things. One, purpose really is a core differentiator because it becomes sort of woven into the DNA of your organization. And instead of it being something that you need to convince people about, it's your actions and your activities that are what people witness when they're interacting with you that convinces them that the purpose-led strategy that you're employing is actually not something that you're trying to fake. Also, we're dealing with, for the first time in the history of commerce, we have 5 generations working together in the marketplace all at the same time. And while there are different things that are important to different age groups, purpose has a way of being a unifier, regardless of whether you're 20 years old, 40 years old, or 60 years old, because people within an organization many times want to rally around something that's bigger than themselves. And by creating a purpose-driven strategy, what you're really doing is you're saying, regardless of the age of our employees, this is who we are as an organization. And if you believe in something similar, regardless of whether you're an employee, a prospect, a vendor, anybody who might ultimately choose to do business with us, if the idea of a purpose-led strategy is comfortable to you, you're going to gravitate to businesses like that because they're going to feel like the most comfortable place for you to want to do work or sell to or buy from, or any of those things that really make a business hum. But here's the thing, you cannot fake this. As I said before, this cannot be a campaign. It absolutely has to be a commitment, because you have to actually do some work around this. You can't just tell people it's what you're all about. You have to show them. You have to document what it is that you're doing in a meaningful way. You have to give it to them in a way that they consume it, in a way that you're not around to sell that to them. They're just going to find it, consume it, get excited about who you are as an organization. And by focusing on the humans behind your logo, what you're really doing is you're giving people from outside the organization the best possible chance to fall in love with the people behind your organization, because they're going to communicate what it is about the business that resonates with them. And that's what people are really looking for. If you remember way back to the beginning part of the presentation, I mentioned that people are turning to one another for the confidence in making a decision for one organization over the other. And so by opening up the people behind what you do to the people who are seeking that kind of connection, you're giving yourself the best opportunity to build that trust that we've been talking about. And then ultimately, once that seeps into the DNA of your organization, it has a way of galvanizing the culture of your company, and it makes it really, really sticky. Because here's what we found in our research. If you can believe this, time and time and time again in the interviews that we did in Red Goldfish, we kept hearing the same three themes over and over and over again. Record sales results. People were experiencing sales growth year over year in many instances that saw their business double in size. I don't know how many of you can say that. I know I struggled with building my business in a way that would allow it to double every year. But by giving yourself the purpose-led strategy, you're really ensuring that you have the best possible opportunity to make that be the case. Passionate, loyal employees. When people believe that they're working for something that is bigger than themselves, they have a tendency to want to be there for the long term. And we heard stories in the book of people turning down jobs that would have paid them more or perhaps gave them better benefits because they weren't entirely certain that the trade that they were going to make for increased wages or better benefits wasn't going to necessarily be at the expense of culture. And in many instances, people will waive off a difference in salary or benefits because of the culture that they've grown to love within the organizations in which they work. And then lastly, and maybe most importantly, because of what you see from loyal employees, you usually end up with raving fans, because those fans of the organization have been excited about the experience that they've gotten from working with your organization. And oftentimes that's driven by loyal employees who are excited to come to work every day. And by virtue of that excitement, it has a way of translating to the relationship with the client in a way that really energizes your client base to make them want to go out and tell their friends and tell their neighbors and tell their peers about you as a company and what you're all about, so that more and more people are showing up at your door ready to do business with you without you really having to do a lot in the way of convincing them that you would be the right choice for them. Okay, so how do I do that? Well, in the book, what we were able to do by virtue of our analysis of all of those 300 case studies that we were able to come upon, we were able to highlight these 5 different categories in which you as a business could perhaps consider ways to bake in some of these things to what you do. Or better yet, what we see in many instances when we go to have discussions with clients as consultants, what we find out is that many organizations are already doing one of these 5 things. And what you've not done is realize that it was something that you were doing, or really done much in the way of communicating that that's what matters to you in a way that those prospects and clients and customers could know about in a meaningful kind of way. So do an analysis, see if there are any of these elements that are native to your own business, or if it speaks to you, even if you're not doing it right now, this might be the best opportunity for you to want to go ahead and get started, because here would be my suggestion to you. Don't start something that you don't truly believe in, because it will not have the sticking and staying power that you're going to need for the long term in order to be able to show people that this is what you're really all about. Again, this cannot be a campaign. This cannot be just for a limited period of time. This has got to be who you're all about as an organization, and you've got to commit to being able to do this for the long term, or else you run the risk of actually creating a worse environment for yourself than had you done nothing at all. But imagine if you were able to highlight and document the ways that your business is giving back to the community, or giving back to the employees, or giving back to some organization that you all care about. It's vitally important that you communicate that information so that other people who care about those organizations as well will want to rally to your cause, because they know that by supporting you, you're also going to support the things that they care about as well. And it's that shared belief that will create the stickiness for you with that prospect or client. If you're trying to help the underserved in some way, people who traditionally have barriers to employment, it's really, really important to be able to communicate that you're doing that. And more importantly, communicate why. Because there's a lot of people out there right now who are looking for ways to help those who are looking for a leg up, a hand up. And if you can show that by doing business with you, that that's going to occur, you're going to find people who are going to flock to you, because they really want to see that improvement societally for people who traditionally may have not had the same kind of opportunity as you and I. Or as I mentioned earlier in the alignment category, if there's something that you're passionate about with comes to making Mother Earth somehow a better place, My gosh, there's so many people in the world right now who care about that as well. And if you can show the way that by doing business with you, that there's going to be some environmental benefit, you're giving the opportunity for those people who care about that same thing to come and find you and have the two of you work together to the benefit of Mother Earth as the way that both of you would like to see happen. There are tremendous experience-based opportunities for you to create where you can have a clothing drive, you can have a food drive, you can have a Habitat for Humanity Day where you all go work together. You could go to a virtual concert together for the benefit of a nonprofit. By creating memorable experiences and by getting people that work with you and for you out from behind their traditional day-to-day activities and out working on something that's bigger than both of you in a way that creates a memorable experience for both you and that person. Oh my gosh, that's an incredibly sticky relationship binder that has a way of happening for the long term, because especially if you can repeat those experiences, it becomes something that those people will start to rely and look forward to. And especially in situations like we're dealing with today, where we're being isolated and separated, people are really looking forward to opportunities to make something memorable because we have so much fewer of those going on right now. So if you can do something really amazing and elegant for people who are seeking out those experiences, you're going to create a really sticky experience that people are going to look forward to. And ultimately, there is a reporting characteristic to this, which builds transparency, which ultimately, by virtue of the transparency that you're showing through the ways that you're reporting on the work that you're doing. And there's a multitude of ways to get that done that we cover in the book. But there are, by virtue of that transparency building, you're also creating trust with that person. And we would tell you, really more so now than ever, trust is the most important thing. So much so that in the book, we've gone so far as to create an index for you. It gives you an understanding and a framework by which you can use to navigate your relationships with both your prospects and your clients and your employees and your vendors. And what we would really tell you is that in this moment, before you do anything else with the people that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, ask yourself, where am I from a trust relationship with this person at that moment? And by doing so, what you're really giving yourself the opportunity to do is to build activities into each of these transition points, so that once you recognize where you are in that trust relationship with that person at that time, you can start building a set of activities for yourself that you can rely upon and fall back on in those moments when you ultimately recognize exactly where you are. Most of us expect that we would be in a weak relationship with most people. And so by creating lots of activities that would be focused on those weak relationships, really giving yourself the best opportunity to move yourself up this continuum. And as you do so, what you're really doing is you're giving yourself the opportunity to get those customers, to keep those customers, and then ultimately, as we said, to make them feel special and really wow them in a way that would make them feel like they're your ohana. Ohana is a Hawaiian term for family, and it has a much broader definition than the American version of family, which suggests that your brothers and your sisters and your moms and your aunts and your uncles and your cousins. Ohana in Hawaiian includes all of those blood relatives, but it also allows you the opportunity to self-select people into your ohana in a way that the person who gets accepted into that circle recognizes, respects, and honors the fact that they're in that position. And what I saw during COVID and the shelter in place that followed was people who didn't have a strong sense of where they were in their trust relationship doing all kinds of damaging activities to the relationship that they may or may not have had with the person that they were interacting with at that moment. And most often that took the shape of a cold call. Imagine if you got a cold call during the shelter in place order and you had a family member who had been COVID exposed, or heaven help, you had someone that was close to you who was in the hospital and you were not able to really be at their side and care for them. And suddenly now someone is making a cold call on you because that's their job. And ultimately, at the end of the day, regardless of whether it was shelter in place or not, those of us who are responsible for sales still have to try to establish new relationships, and create sales. But what used to have necessarily been an intrusion where it was forgivable, if you happen to make that cold call in that moment when that person was dealing with a crisis, that created some hostility. And what the result of that hostility typically was instead of that being seen as an intrusion that maybe you could recover from, it became a black eye for your organization. And that is often very difficult to recover from, because someone who's been intruded upon that way will react emotionally. And usually part of that emotional reaction is to tell everyone around them how they feel about what happened to them. And that will create an extremely negative effect, which will push you down into that negative trust relationship. And here's what I would tell you about those. You should not ignore negative trust relationships. You should acknowledge them when they occur, and you should have a set of activities in place that you can rely upon to try to improve those negative trust relationships, because like we said, you run the risk of that turning out to be really bad for you if you are just to ignore it. So this trust index is a big part of the back half of the book, and it allows you the opportunity to really consider the ways that a purpose statement might help you overcome some of the problems that you're going to face in these stages of growth as you're trying to move your customers up the trust continuum. It's really, really important that you try to consider that, because that's going to be the single most important thing for you to be able to do in order for you to grow your business in this post-COVID economy. And it's been so good giving this presentation to you. I hope it was of some value to you. I noticed that there really aren't any questions in the chat. So I'm going to just pause for a second, see if there's any questions from the crowd. And absent that, I'm going to go ahead and bid you adieu and say, we're so grateful for you participating in the Wild Wednesday webinars. As I mentioned, the next one will be February 24th. We're going to continue to enhance and expand the program. And we really, really hope that this was of some value to you and that you look forward to our next webinar. Until then, thank you and take care.